The dust cloud trailing behind Sarah Miller could be seen from miles away, a testament to the distance she had already traveled by foot across the unforgiving terrain of the Arizona Territory. The year was 1878, and the harsh summer sun beat down mercilessly on her sunburned face as she trudged forward, her skirts heavy with dust and her boots worn nearly through at the soles. One small child clung to her skirt while another rested on her hip, his head lolling against her shoulder in exhausted sleep. "Just a little further, Emma," Sarah whispered to her 5-year-old daughter, whose tiny legs had been walking since dawn. "We'll find water soon." Her voice cracked from thirst, the water canteen having run dry hours ago. Emma looked up with tired eyes. "My feet hurt, Mama." "I know, sweetheart." Sarah shifted 3-year-old James on her hip, his weight becoming increasingly difficult to bear. The burden of her children's survival pressed down on her more heavily than any physical load. 3 days ago, the stagecoach they'd been traveling on had been attacked by bandits. The driver had been killed, and the other passengers scattered. Sarah had grabbed her children and fled into the scrubland, hiding until the danger passed. But being stranded in the wilderness had left her with no choice but to walk toward what she hoped was the direction of Willow Creek, the town where her sister lived. The loss of her husband Daniel to tuberculosis 6 months earlier had driven her decision to leave St. Louis. With no means to support her children and the landlord threatening eviction, she'd sold everything to purchase 3 tickets west. Now, that dream of a new beginning seemed as distant as the horizon itself. Sarah's legs trembled beneath her and she fought the urge to collapse. She couldn't give up. Her children depended on her. The sound came so suddenly that at first she thought she was imagining it the rhythmic beat of hooves against dry earth. Sarah turned, squinting against the sun, and saw a lone rider approaching from the west. Fear and hope warred within her. Out here, a stranger could mean salvation or danger. She set James down beside Emma and positioned herself in front of them, one hand reaching back to keep them close. As the rider drew nearer, she could make out a tall figure atop a chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the azure sky. The horse slowed as it approached, and Sarah finally saw his face tanned and weathered beneath a wide-brimmed hat, with eyes the color of a stormy sky. A thick mustache framed his mouth, which was set in a grim line as he surveyed the pitiful sight before him. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "looks like you're a fair piece from anywhere." Sarah swallowed, her dry throat clicking. "We're trying to reach Willow Creek. Our stagecoach was attacked." The man's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the children. "That's still 20 miles north. You won't make it on foot, especially with little ones." Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. "We don't have a choice." He studied her for a long moment, then dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and strong hands that spoke of years of hard work. "Name's Samuel Wade," he said, walking toward his saddlebag. "I run cattle about a day's ride from here." "Sarah Miller," she replied cautiously. "These are my children, Emma and James." Samuel nodded to the children, then pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to Sarah. "Drink." "Not too fast." The water was warm but felt like heaven on her parched lips. She allowed herself 2 small sips before kneeling to help her children drink. Samuel watched them, his expression unreadable. "How long have you been walking?" 3 days, Sarah admitted, standing again. "We've been following the North Star at night and resting during the hottest part of the day." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "That's smart thinking, but it won't get you to Willow Creek alive." He looked at the horizon, then back at her. "My ranch is closer than town. You can rest there, get proper food and water, and I'll take you to Willow Creek when you're recovered." Sarah hesitated. Going with a stranger posed its own risks, but continuing on foot with her exhausted children would likely be a death sentence. She studied his face, looking for any sign of deceit or malice, but found only straightforward concern. "Why would you help us?" she asked. Samuel's expression softened slightly. "Out here, we help those in need. It's how we survive." He returned to his horse and adjusted the saddle. "I can take the little ones up with me. You'll have to walk a while longer, but we'll make better time." Sarah shook her head. "I'll carry James. Emma can ride with you if she's willing." Samuel seemed about to argue but nodded instead. "As you wish, madam." He reached down and gently lifted Emma onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. The child looked tiny against his broad chest, but seemed immediately more at ease once settled. Samuel looked down at Sarah, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You'll walk beside me from now on," he said firmly. "Not behind, not alone, beside me, understand?" Those simple words, "you'll walk beside me," struck Sarah with unexpected force. It had been so long since anyone had offered to share her burden, to walk with her rather than leaving her to trudge forward alone. "Yes," she managed to say. "I understand." Samuel nodded and clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward at a slow walk. "My ranch is about 5 miles east. We'll be there before sunset if we keep a steady pace." Sarah hoisted James higher on her hip and fell into step beside the horse, feeling for the first time in days that perhaps they might survive after all. True to his word, Samuel kept his horse at a pace Sarah could maintain, though she noticed him watching her with increasing concern as the afternoon wore on. James had fallen asleep against her shoulder, and her arms ached from carrying him, but she refused to complain. "There's a creek just ahead," Samuel said after they had been traveling for about an hour. "We'll stop there and rest." The sight of the narrow ribbon of water brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Samuel dismounted and helped Emma down before approaching Sarah. "Let me take him," he said, nodding to James. This time, Sarah didn't protest. Her arms felt like lead, and she gratefully allowed Samuel to take her sleeping son. She watched as he carried James to the shade of a cottonwood tree and gently laid him down. "Drink and rest," Samuel instructed, handing her the canteen again. "I'll refill our water." Sarah sank down beside her sleeping son, her legs trembling with relief. Emma came to sit beside her, leaning against her mother's side. "Mr. Wade has a nice horse, Mama," Emma whispered. "He told me her name is Penny." Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "That's a good name for a chestnut horse. He said he has other horses at his ranch, and maybe I can ride a smaller one when we get there." Sarah watched as Samuel knelt by the creek, filling the canteens. His movements were efficient and purposeful. "We'll see, Emma, we won't be staying long." Samuel returned with the filled canteens and a handful of berries. "Service berries," he explained, offering them to Emma. "Sweet this time of year." Emma took them eagerly, and Samuel turned to Sarah. "How did you end up out here alone, Mrs. Miller?" Sarah hesitated, then decided there was little harm in telling him the truth. "My husband died of tuberculosis 6 months ago. We lost our home in St. Louis, and I was taking the children to live with my sister in Willow Creek." Samuel nodded, his expression softening. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "The stagecoach was attacked 3 days ago. The driver was killed, and we fled into the brush. I've been trying to find our way to town ever since." "You're lucky to be alive," Samuel said bluntly. "Bandits have been plaguing the stage routes lately, desperate men looking for easy money." "Are we safe now?" Sarah asked, glancing at her children. "You're with me now," Samuel said simply, as if that answered everything. And strangely, Sarah found that it did. After resting for half an hour, they continued their journey. This time, Samuel insisted on carrying James, and Sarah was too exhausted to argue. The boy woke briefly, frightened to find himself in a stranger's arms, but Samuel spoke to him in a low, soothing voice until James relaxed against his broad chest. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, a collection of buildings came into view. Samuel's ranch was larger than Sarah had expected, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, flanked by a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. "Welcome to the Triple W," Samuel said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn and hurried toward them. "Boss." We was getting worried. He stopped short when he spotted Sarah and the children. "Frank, this is Mrs. Miller and her children," Samuel said. "They'll be staying with us for a few days. Mrs. Miller, this is Frank Donnelly, my foreman." Frank touched his hat respectfully. "Madam." "Frank, take Penny to the barn and have Mrs. O'Leary prepare some food," Samuel instructed, dismounting with James still in his arms. "Our guests have had a rough journey." "Right away, boss." As Frank led the horse away, Samuel turned to Sarah. "Mrs. O'Leary is my housekeeper. She'll help you get settled." Sarah nodded gratefully, taking Emma's hand as they followed Samuel to the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, clean, and well-furnished, with polished wood floors and a large stone fireplace. A plump woman with gray streaked hair hurried from what Sarah presumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Sarah and the children. "Saints preserve us. What have you brought home now, Samuel Wade?" "Mrs. Miller and her children need our help, Mrs. O'Leary," Samuel said, handing the still drowsy James to Sarah. "They've been walking for days." Mrs. O'Leary's expression immediately softened. "You poor dears, come with me, we'll get you cleaned up and fed." She turned to Samuel. "I'll have supper ready in an hour." "Thank you, Mrs. O'Leary," Samuel replied, then addressed Sarah. "I have business to attend to. Make yourself at home." Before Sarah could thank him, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Mrs. O'Leary clicked her tongue. "That man, always in a hurry." She smiled warmly at Sarah. "Come along, dearie. Let's get you and these little ones taken care of." The next hour passed in a blur of blessed comfort. Mrs. O'Leary filled a tin bath with warm water and helped Sarah bathe the children, then allowed her privacy to wash herself. The older woman provided clean clothing, a simple dress that was slightly too large for Sarah, and nightshirts for the children that Mrs. O'Leary claimed belonged to her grandchildren who occasionally visited. Clean, dressed, and with her hair neatly combed, Sarah felt human again. James and Emma were already sitting at the kitchen table, eating bowls of stew with an enthusiasm that warmed Sarah's heart. They were hungry as little wolves, Mrs. O'Leary said approvingly. "Sit down and eat, Mrs. Miller. You look ready to drop." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, the best thing she'd tasted in months. She was so focused on her meal that she didn't notice Samuel's return until he pulled out the chair across from her. "Feeling better?" he asked, accepting a bowl from Mrs. O'Leary. Sarah nodded. "Yes, thank you." "Your hospitality is most appreciated." Samuel shrugged off her gratitude. "No one should be wandering the territory alone, especially not with children." "How long have you had this ranch?" Sarah asked, wanting to shift the focus from her circumstances. 10 years, he replied. "Came out from Pennsylvania after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Built it up from a line shack and 50 acres to what you see now." "It's impressive," Sarah said sincerely. A hint of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "It's home. After supper, Mrs. O'Leary showed Sarah to a bedroom on the second floor. "The children can sleep here with you," she said, turning down the covers on a large bed. "Mr. Wade's room is at the end of the hall if you need anything during the night." Sarah thanked her and tucked her already drowsy children into bed. James fell asleep almost immediately, but Emma resisted, her eyes wide in the lamplight. "Mama, is this our new home?" she asked. Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair back. "No, sweetheart, we're just visiting. We'll go to Aunt Beatrice's soon." "I like it here," Emma said sleepily. "Mr. Wade has nice eyes." Sarah smiled. "Go to sleep, Emma." Once both children were asleep, Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. She could make out the silhouette of Samuel by the corral, checking on his horses before retiring for the night. There was something solid and reassuring about him, a steadiness she hadn't encountered in a long time. She watched as he made his way back to the house, his long strides eating up the distance with an easy confidence. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to belong in a place like this, with a man like him. Then she pushed the thought away. Her husband had been dead only 6 months, and she had her children to think about. Besides, a man like Samuel Wade surely had no interest in a penniless widow with 2 young children. Sarah turned from the window and slipped into bed beside her children, determined to focus on recovering her strength for the journey ahead. But as sleep claimed her, it was Samuel's words that echoed in her mind. "You'll walk beside me from now on." Dawn arrived with the sounds of a working ranch roosters crowing, cattle lowing, and men calling to one another as they began their day's work. Sarah woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks, despite the unfamiliar surroundings. Emma and James were still sleeping soundly, so she rose quietly, dressed in the borrowed dress, and made her way downstairs. She found Mrs. O'Leary in the kitchen, kneading dough with flour-covered hands. "Good morning, dearie," the housekeeper greeted her cheerfully. "Sleep well." Better than I have in months, Sarah admitted. Can I help with breakfast? Mrs. O'Leary looked pleased. You can stir the oatmeal if you like. Mr. Wade and the men have already eaten and gone out to work. They rise with the sun around here. Sarah took over stirring the pot of oatmeal, grateful for the normalcy of the task. How many men work here? 5 ranch hands plus Frank, the foreman, Mrs. O'Leary replied, shaping her dough into loaves. It's a good-sized operation, Mr. Wade runs about 200 head of cattle, plus he breeds some of the finest horses in the territory. He's done well for himself, Sarah observed. Mrs. O'Leary nodded. He's a good man, works harder than any of his hands and treats everyone fair. She gave Sarah a sidelong glance. Never married, though, too busy building his empire, I suppose. Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the woman's obvious interest in providing this particular information. I'm sure he has his reasons. Mrs. O'Leary responded noncommittally, a small smile playing at her lips. The children appeared not long after, and breakfast passed pleasantly. Sarah was just clearing the dishes when Samuel entered the kitchen, his shirt damp with sweat from the morning's work. Mrs. Miller, he nodded to her. Children, I trust you slept well. Yes, thank you, Sarah replied. Your home is very comfortable. Samuel accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. O'Leary. I've been thinking about your situation. Willow Creek is a day's ride from here. I can take you there tomorrow if you feel up to traveling. Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. That would be very kind. I don't want to impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary. It's no imposition, Samuel said, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his cup. But I assume your sister is worried about you. She doesn't know we were coming, Sarah admitted. I sent a letter, but I doubt it arrived before we did. Samuel raised an eyebrow. So she's not expecting you, not exactly, but she's always said we were welcome if we ever needed a place to stay. Samuel seemed to consider this. What does your sister do in Willow Creek? Her husband owns the general store, Sarah explained. They have a small home behind the shop. I see. Samuel set down his cup. Mrs. Miller, I don't mean to pry, but have you considered what you'll do once you reach Willow Creek? Will your sister's husband be able to support 3 additional people? The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. It was something she had worried about during the long journey west, but had pushed aside in her determination to reach safety. I plan to find work, she said, lifting her chin. I can sew, cook, clean. I'm not afraid of hard work. Samuel nodded slowly. I don't doubt that, but jobs for women are scarce in these parts, especially with young children to care for. Sarah felt defensive. We won't be a burden to anyone for long. I'll make my own way. I'm sure you will, Samuel agreed, surprising her. You're clearly resourceful. He finished his coffee and stood. I need to check on a new foal. Perhaps you and the children would like to come along. Being cooped up indoors after days in the open might feel strange. Emma immediately perked up. A baby horse, can we, Mama, please? Sarah couldn't deny her daughter's obvious excitement. If Mr. Wade doesn't mind, I suppose we could. I invited you, didn't I? Samuel said, a hint of a smile softening his features. Come on, then. They followed him to the barn, where the sweet smell of hay mingled with the earthier scents of horses and leather. In a stall near the back, a mare stood protectively over a wobbly-legged foal that couldn't have been more than a day old. This is Duchess, Samuel said, stroking the mare's neck, and her new son, born yesterday afternoon. Emma gasped with delight at the sight of the spindly foal, its coat still damp in places. He's beautiful, even James, normally shy around animals, pressed closer to the stall door for a better look. What will you name him? Sarah asked. Samuel glanced at her. I haven't decided. Perhaps the children would like to suggest something. Emma bounced on her toes. Can I really name him? You can suggest a name, Samuel corrected gently. I'll have to approve it, of course. Emma thought for a moment, her small face screwed up in concentration. How about Starlight? Because he has that white star on his forehead. Samuel considered the name, then nodded. Starlight, it suits him. The pure joy on Emma's face at having her suggestion accepted made Sarah's heart swell. It had been too long since she'd seen her daughter so animated. They spent the morning exploring the ranch, with Samuel showing them the corral where his prized stallions were exercised. The chicken coop, where Mrs. O'Leary collected eggs each morning, and even the small vegetable garden behind the house. "You're very self-sufficient here," Sarah remarked as they walked back toward the house for the midday meal. "Have to be," Samuel replied. "Town's too far to rely on for daily needs." As they approached the house, a rider came galloping up the road, pulling his horse to a stop in a cloud of dust. Frank emerged from the barn at the commotion. "Rider coming in fast, boss," he called to Samuel. Samuel moved to position himself between Sarah and the children and the approaching horseman. "Stay back," he instructed them quietly. The rider dismounted in a rush, his hat flying off to reveal a young man with an anxious expression. "Mr. Wade, thank goodness you're here." "What is it, Billy?" Samuel asked, relaxing slightly as he recognized the young man. "It's the Harrington place," Billy said breathlessly. "Raiders hit them last night, burned the house, stole their stock. Mr. Harrington's hurt bad and Mrs. Harrington sent me to ask for help." Samuel's expression darkened. "How many raiders?" Mrs. Harrington thought about 6 or 7, Billy replied. "They wore bandanas over their faces." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It sounded eerily similar to the men who had attacked the stagecoach. Samuel turned to Frank. "Gather the men, we'll ride to the Harrington place immediately." He looked at Sarah, his expression grave. "I'm sorry, but I need to go, Mrs. O'Leary will look after you until I return." Sarah nodded, understanding the urgency. "Of course, is there anything I can do to help?" Samuel seemed about to refuse, then reconsidered. "Mrs. Harrington might need a woman's help. Can you gather some clean linens and any medicines Mrs. O'Leary might have? We'll take them with us." "Right away," Sarah agreed, ushering the children toward the house. Inside, she quickly explained the situation to Mrs. O'Leary, who immediately began gathering supplies. "Those poor folks," the housekeeper muttered as she packed a basket with bandages, salves, and food. "The Harringtons are good people. Their place is about 10 miles south of here." Sarah helped where she could, wrapping bread and cheese in clean cloths and filling a jug with fresh water. When they returned outside, Samuel and his men were mounted and ready to ride. "Thank you," Samuel said, taking the basket from Sarah. "We'll be back as soon as we can. Keep the doors locked until we return." Sarah nodded, a sudden fear gripping her at the thought of him riding into danger. "Be careful." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, surprise perhaps at her concern. "Always am," he said softly, then turned to his men. "Let's ride." Sarah watched them gallop away, dust billowing behind them. Emma tugged at her skirt. "Where's Mr. Wade going, Mama?" Sarah took her daughter's hand. "To help some neighbors who are in trouble. He'll be back soon." Mrs. O'Leary ushered them inside and locked the door behind them. "No sense worrying," she said briskly. "Mr. Wade can handle himself. Now, who wants to help me bake a pie?" The afternoon passed slowly. Sarah helped Mrs. O'Leary with chores around the house, grateful for the distraction. The children played in the kitchen, building a fort from empty flour sacks and wooden spoons under Mrs. O'Leary's indulgent supervision. As evening approached with no sign of Samuel and his men, Sarah's anxiety grew. She found herself repeatedly checking the window, scanning the horizon for riders. "They might be staying the night to help the Harringtons," Mrs. O'Leary said, noticing Sarah's worry. "Sometimes these things take time." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her concern. "Of course." After putting the children to bed, Sarah returned downstairs, unable to sleep. Mrs. O'Leary had retired for the night, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She sat in a chair by the window, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the moonlit yard. It was well past midnight when she heard the sound of hooves. Sarah rushed to the door, peering through the small window beside it. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Samuel leading his men into the yard. Without thinking, she unbolted the door and stepped onto the porch. Samuel dismounted wearily, handing his reins to Frank before noticing Sarah standing there. "You should be asleep," he said, climbing the porch steps. "I couldn't," Sarah admitted. "How are the Harringtons?" Samuel sighed heavily, removing his hat. "Mr. Harrington will live, though he took a bad beating. They lost everything, livestock, supplies, even their wagon." "Those poor people," Sarah murmured. "Was it the same band that attacked the stagecoach, do you think?" "Likely," Samuel nodded grimly. "They've been growing bolder lately. The sheriff in Willow Creek doesn't have enough men to patrol the whole area." Sarah noticed a dark stain on Samuel's sleeve. "You're hurt." Samuel glanced down as if noticing the blood for the first time. "It's nothing. One of the raiders left a few behind to keep watch. There was a brief skirmish." "Let me see," Sarah insisted, reaching for his arm. To her surprise, Samuel allowed her to examine the wound, a deep gash on his upper arm that had bled through his shirt. "This needs cleaning and bandaging," she said firmly. "Come inside." Samuel followed her into the kitchen, where Sarah lit a lamp and gathered clean water and bandages. He removed his shirt at her direction, revealing a muscular torso marked with old scars. Sarah tried to maintain a professional demeanor as she cleaned the wound, but she was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from his skin and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You've done this before," Samuel observed as she expertly wrapped a bandage around his arm. "My husband was often ill," Sarah explained quietly. "I learned to tend wounds and fevers out of necessity." Samuel studied her face in the lamplight. "You've had a hard road, Mrs. Miller." Sarah secured the bandage with a small knot. "No harder than many others. There, that should heal well if you keep it clean." "Thank you," Samuel said, making no move to put his shirt back on or to leave. Instead, he continued to watch her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What happened to the raiders?" Sarah asked, busying herself with clearing away the bloodied water. "They escaped," Samuel admitted, his jaw tightening. "But we found tracks leading north toward the territorial border. I've sent word to the sheriff." Sarah nodded, suddenly exhausted now that the tension of waiting had passed. "You should rest. It's been a long day." Samuel stood, towering over her in the small kitchen. "As should you." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for waiting up, it was good to come home to someone concerned for our return." The simple honesty in his words touched something deep within Sarah. "You've been kind to us. Of course I was concerned." Samuel reached out, his fingers briefly brushing against her hand where it rested on the table. "Good night, Mrs. Miller." "Good night, Mr. Wade," she replied softly, watching as he collected his shirt and left the kitchen. Sarah remained at the table for several minutes, her hand still warm where he had touched it, wondering at the strange fluttering in her chest, and the sudden certainty that leaving for Willow Creek tomorrow would be harder than she had anticipated. Morning brought news that changed their plans. Samuel entered the kitchen as Sarah was helping Mrs. O'Leary prepare breakfast, his expression troubled. "I've just had word from a passing rider," he announced. "The raiders hit another homestead last night closer to Willow Creek. The sheriff has advised against travel on the main roads for the next few days until they can track down the gang." Sarah felt a mixture of anxiety and, guiltily, relief. "So we can't go to Willow Creek yet?" "Not safely," Samuel confirmed. "I'm sorry, but I think it's best if you and the children stay here until the situation is resolved." "We don't want to impose," Sarah began. "It's not an imposition," Samuel interrupted firmly. "I wouldn't send anyone out there with those raiders still active, especially not a woman and children." Mrs. O'Leary nodded vigorously. "He's right, dearie, much safer here with us." Sarah looked at her children, happily eating the pancakes Mrs. O'Leary had made, seemingly content in this temporary home. "Very well," she agreed, "but I insist on earning our keep while we're here. I can help with cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever needs doing." Samuel looked as if he might argue, then nodded. "If it makes you feel better, Mrs. O'Leary could probably use the help." The housekeeper beamed. "Indeed I could. It'll be nice to have another pair of hands around here." And so it was decided. Sarah and her children would remain at the Triple W Ranch until it was safe to travel to Willow Creek. What Sarah hadn't anticipated was how quickly they would settle into life on the ranch, or how natural it would begin to feel, days passed in a rhythm of work and rest. Sarah helped Mrs. O'Leary with household chores, mended the ranch hands' clothing, and even assisted with the cooking. Emma spent hours watching the horses in the corral, while James followed Mrs. O'Leary around the kitchen, fascinated by her baking. Samuel was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each evening to sit with them after supper, sometimes reading aloud from one of his books or telling stories of his early days in the territory. The children were drawn to him like moths to a flame, especially Emma, who peppered him with endless questions about horses and cattle. One evening, about a week after their arrival, Sarah found Samuel on the porch after the children had gone to bed. He was smoking a pipe, gazing out at the star-filled sky. "May I join you?" Sarah asked, hesitating at the door. Samuel gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Of course." Sarah sat, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Any news about the raiders?" The sheriff sent word today. "They've tracked them into the mountains, but haven't caught them yet." Samuel tapped his pipe against the porch railing. "It could be another week before it's safe to travel." Sarah nodded, surprised to find she wasn't disappointed by the news. "The children are happy here," she said after a moment. "It's been good for them to have some stability after everything." Samuel glanced at her. "And you, are you happy here, Sarah?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. "Yes, I believe I am," she admitted softly. "It's been a long time since I felt safe." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about your situation." Sarah tensed slightly. "Oh, the Triple W is doing well, but there's more work than Mrs. O'Leary and I can handle alone. The house needs attention, the books need keeping, and frankly, the men eat better when there's a woman's touch in the kitchen." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I could use a housekeeper, someone to help manage things." "The position would come with room and board for you and your children, plus a monthly wage." Sarah stared at him, stunned. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a choice," Samuel clarified. "You could go on to your sister's as planned, or you could stay here at least for a while. See if it suits you." Sarah's mind raced. The thought of staying at the ranch, of not having to face the uncertainty of imposing on her sister's household, was tempting. But there was something else, something in Samuel's eyes that suggested he might be offering more than just employment. "What about Mrs. O'Leary?" Sarah asked. "I wouldn't want to take her position." Samuel smiled slightly. "Mrs. O'Leary has been complaining for years that the work is too much for her aging bones. She'd welcome the help, and she's taken quite a shine to you and the children." Sarah looked out at the ranch, silver in the moonlight. It was beautiful here, peaceful in a way that soothed her soul. And Samuel. There was something about him, a steadiness that called to her, that made her feel as though she had found solid ground after months of drifting. "I'll think about it," she promised. "Thank you for the offer." Samuel nodded, seemingly content with her response. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the stars wheel overhead, each lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. The next few days took on a different quality as Sarah considered Samuel's offer. She found herself noticing details about the ranch she had overlooked before, the way the morning light streamed through the kitchen windows. The cozy corner in the parlor that would be perfect for the children to play on rainy days. The view of the mountains from the upstairs bedroom where she slept. She also found herself watching Samuel more closely, observing how he interacted with his men, always fair but firm. How gentle he was with the horses, especially the new foal that Emma had named. And how patient he was with her children, answering Emma's endless questions and teaching James how to whittle a small wooden horse. One afternoon, Sarah was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard Emma's delighted laugh. Looking up, she saw Samuel leading a small pony from the barn, with Emma practically dancing alongside him. "Mama, look," Emma called excitedly. "Mr. Wade says I can learn to ride." Sarah approached, eyeing the gentle-looking pony with a mixture of concern and amusement. "Is that so?" Samuel met her gaze, a question in his eyes. "If it's all right with you, this is Daisy. She's the gentlest pony on the ranch, perfect for beginners." Sarah looked at her daughter's hopeful face and found she couldn't refuse. "I suppose a few lessons wouldn't hurt, as long as you're careful." Emma squealed with delight, and Samuel smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face and made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "We'll start with the basics," he promised, helping Emma onto the pony's back. "How to sit properly, how to hold the reins. No galloping, I promise." Sarah watched as Samuel led the pony in a slow circle, one hand on Emma's back to steady her, his voice calm and encouraging as he instructed her. James tugged at Sarah's skirt. "Can I ride too, Mama?" he asked hopefully. Sarah smoothed his hair. "When you're a bit older like Emma, for now you can watch and learn." Samuel glanced over at them. Actually, there's room up there for James too if he'd like to sit in front of his sister. Daisy can easily carry both of them. James looked up at Sarah with pleading eyes, and she found herself nodding. All right, but be careful. Samuel lifted James onto the pony, positioning him securely in front of Emma. Hold onto the mane just like that, he instructed. Your sister will hold you steady. The sight of her children on the pony, their faces alight with joy, and Samuel walking beside them, protective and patient, created an ache in Sarah's chest, a yearning for something she had thought lost forever. A family, whole and happy. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah found Samuel in his study poring over a ledger by lamplight. "May I speak with you?" she asked from the doorway. Samuel looked up, setting aside his pen. "Of course, come in." Sarah entered the room, taking the chair he indicated across from his desk. She gathered her courage and met his eyes directly. "I've been thinking about your offer." Samuel leaned forward slightly, his expression carefully neutral. "And I'd like to accept with one condition," Sarah said, her heart pounding. "What condition is that?" Sarah took a deep breath. "That you understand this is temporary. I need to establish my independence to support my children on my own terms. I can't." She faltered, then pressed on. "I can't allow myself or my children to become dependent on another man's charity, only to have it withdrawn." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, hurt, perhaps, or disappointment. "This isn't charity, Sarah. It's a job offer based on what I've seen of your capabilities." He paused, then added more softly, "But I understand your need for independence. You have my word that this arrangement will remain professional, and you'll be free to leave whenever you choose." Sarah nodded, feeling simultaneously relieved and strangely disappointed by his businesslike response. "Then I accept, thank you." Samuel stood, extending his hand across the desk. "Welcome to the Triple W, Mrs. Miller." Sarah shook his hand, trying to ignore the warmth that spread up her arm at his touch. "Thank you, Mr. Wade." As she left the study, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right decision. The practical side of her knew this was the best option for her children, a safe home, steady income, and stability after months of uncertainty. But another part of her worried about the feelings she was developing for Samuel Wade, feelings that would make maintaining a professional relationship increasingly difficult. What Sarah didn't see was the way Samuel watched her leave, or how he slumped back in his chair afterward, running a hand over his face with a sigh that spoke volumes about his own conflicted emotions. The transition from guest to employee was surprisingly seamless. Mrs. O'Leary was indeed delighted to share her duties, taking Sarah under her wing and showing her the rhythms and routines of managing the ranch house. "You're a natural," Mrs. O'Leary declared one morning as they worked side by side, kneading dough for the day's bread. "Mr. Wade was smart to hire you." Sarah smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I'm grateful for the opportunity and for your guidance," Mrs. O'Leary chuckled. "Between you and me, dearie, I've been hoping for years that Mr. Wade would find someone to help lighten my load. These old bones aren't what they used to be." "I'm happy to help," Sarah said sincerely, "and the children love it here. Emma talks of nothing but horses and James follows you around like a devoted puppy." Mrs. O'Leary's eyes twinkled. "Their lovely children bring life to this old house." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And Mr. Wade seems quite taken with them and with their mother, if I'm not mistaken." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Wade has been kind to all of us. He's a good man." "That he is," Mrs. O'Leary agreed, giving Sarah a knowing look. "And not hard on the eyes, either, Mrs. O'Leary." Sarah exclaimed, embarrassed. The older woman laughed heartily. "Just stating facts, dearie, just stating facts." Despite her embarrassment, Sarah couldn't deny the truth in Mrs. O'Leary's observations. There was something about Samuel Wade that drew her to him, his quiet strength, his kindness to her children, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. But she had resolved to maintain a professional distance for the sake of her independence and her children's security. That resolve was tested daily as she worked alongside Samuel, sharing meals, discussing household matters, and watching him interact with Emma and James. Each day, it became harder to remember that she was just his employee, that the Triple W was just a temporary home until she found her footing. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Sarah had accepted the position, a wagon arrived at the ranch. Sarah was in the garden, harvesting vegetables with James when she heard the commotion. "Looks like we have visitors," she said to James, wiping her hands on her apron. They walked around to the front of the house, where a smartly dressed couple was descending from a wagon. Samuel was already there, greeting them. "Sarah," he called, beckoning her over. "I'd like you to meet some friends. This is Judge William Parker and his wife, Margaret, from Willow Creek." "Judge, Mrs. Parker, this is Mrs. Sarah Miller, my new housekeeper, and her son, James." Sarah curtsied slightly, suddenly conscious of her dirt-stained apron and work-roughened hands. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Margaret Parker, a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes, smiled warmly. "The pleasure is ours, Mrs. Miller. Samuel has told us about your ordeal. I'm so glad you found safe harbor here." "Indeed," Judge Parker agreed, tipping his hat. "The territory can be dangerous for those unprepared. You were fortunate Mr. Wade found you when he did." "Very fortunate," Sarah acknowledged, glancing at Samuel. "The Parkers have come to discuss some legal matters," Samuel explained, "and to bring news from town." "The raiders have been captured," Judge Parker announced. "A posse caught them trying to cross into New Mexico territory. They'll stand trial next month." Relief washed over Sarah. "That's wonderful news." "It means the roads are safe again," Samuel added, his eyes meeting Sarah's with an unspoken question. Sarah understood immediately. With the danger past, she could now safely travel to her sister's home in Willow Creek as originally planned. The thought filled her with unexpected dismay. "That's good to hear," she managed to say, keeping her voice steady. "James, why don't we go find Emma and get cleaned up? We should prepare some refreshments for our guests." As she hurried away with James, Sarah could feel Samuel's gaze following her. The arrival of the Parkers and the news they brought had suddenly made her position at the Triple W feel precarious, reminding her that her arrangement with Samuel was meant to be temporary. In the kitchen, Sarah found Mrs. O'Leary preparing a tray of lemonade and cookies. "I heard we have company," the housekeeper said. "The judge and his wife are good people. They come out a few times a year to visit Mr. Wade." Sarah nodded distractedly, washing her hands at the sink. "Mrs. O'Leary, now that the roads are safe again, do you think Mr. Wade will expect me to leave?" "To go to my sister's as originally planned." Mrs. O'Leary looked surprised. "Why would he? You're working here now, aren't you, unless you want to leave?" "No," Sarah admitted quietly. "I don't want to leave, but our arrangement was made when travel wasn't safe. Now that it is." Mrs. O'Leary patted her hand. "Don't borrow trouble, dearie. Mr. Wade isn't the type to go back on his word. If he offered you a position here, it stands regardless of the roads being safe or not." Sarah wanted to believe her, but doubt had taken root. She busied herself helping Mrs. O'Leary prepare a proper tea for the guests, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. When the tray was ready, Sarah carried it to the parlor, where Samuel was deep in conversation with Judge Parker. The men stood as she entered, and Margaret Parker smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," she said as Sarah set the tray on the small table. "This looks lovely." Sarah served the tea and was about to excuse herself when Samuel spoke. "Sarah, the Parkers have invited us to dinner at their home in Willow Creek tomorrow evening. I thought it might be a good opportunity for you to visit your sister while we're in town." Sarah blinked, surprised by the suggestion. "Oh, yes, that would be nice, thank you." "Excellent," Margaret said enthusiastically, "and please bring your children. We have grandchildren about their age who would love playmates." "That's very kind," Sarah replied, forcing a smile even as her heart sank. It seemed Samuel was indeed expecting her to reconnect with her sister, perhaps as a prelude to her departure from the Triple W. She excused herself, leaving the adults to their discussion, and retreated to the kitchen. Mrs. O'Leary took one look at her face and frowned. "What's wrong, dearie? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah shook her head. "It's nothing, Mr. Wade wants me to visit my sister when we go to Willow Creek tomorrow for dinner with the Parkers." Mrs. O'Leary raised an eyebrow. "And that's upset you because—" "It's not upset exactly," Sarah struggled to explain. "It's just, I haven't written to Beatrice yet. She doesn't know I'm here or that I've taken a position at the ranch. She might expect me to stay with her once she knows I'm in the territory." "Ah," Mrs. O'Leary nodded understandingly. You're afraid your sister might insist you live with her instead of staying here. Yes, Sarah admitted. And I don't want to seem ungrateful for her standing offer of help, but you've made a life here now, Mrs. O'Leary finished for her. The children are settled, you have work you enjoy, and she gave Sarah a knowing look. Perhaps there are other reasons you'd prefer to stay. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. The ranch is good for the children, she said, avoiding Mrs. O'Leary's implied question. Mrs. O'Leary hummed skeptically. Well, dearie, seems to me you need to be honest with your sister and with yourself about what you want. Sarah nodded, knowing the older woman was right but uncertain how to proceed. The thought of leaving the triple W, of leaving Samuel, created an ache in her chest that she could no longer ignore. The next day dawned clear and warm, a perfect late summer day for the trip to Willow Creek. Sarah dressed the children in their best clothes, freshly laundered and mended, and put on her own good dress, a dark blue cotton that Mrs. O'Leary had helped her alter to fit properly. Samuel had the wagon ready after breakfast, and Sarah couldn't help but notice how handsome he looked in his Sunday best, a clean black suit, white shirt, and string tie. He had trimmed his mustache and combed his hair neatly, and the overall effect was quite striking. You look nice, he said as he helped her into the wagon, his hand warm and strong around hers. Thank you, Sarah replied, flustered by the compliment. So do you. The children scrambled up after her, excited for the trip to town. It would be their first visit to Willow Creek, and Emma especially was full of questions about what they would see. As Samuel guided the wagon down the road, Sarah found herself growing increasingly nervous about the impending reunion with her sister. It had been 3 years since they'd last seen each other, when Beatrice had visited St. Louis briefly before her husband's business called them back west. Are you worried about seeing your sister? Samuel asked perceptively, glancing at her as they traveled. Sarah nodded. A little. It's been a long time and circumstances have changed so much. Family is family, Samuel said simply. I'm sure she'll be happy to see you, regardless of the circumstances. Sarah appreciated his reassurance, though it didn't entirely ease her anxiety. I hope so. Willow Creek came into view around midday, a bustling town with a main street lined with wooden buildings, horses tied at hitching posts, and people moving about their business. It was larger than Sarah had expected, with several cross streets, a church steeple visible above the rooftops, and even a small schoolhouse at the edge of town. It's grown since I was last here, Samuel commented as they drove down the main street. The silver mine up in the hills has brought in new people. He pointed out various establishments as they passed the bank, the sheriff's office, the saloon, which he noted with a smile that they would not be visiting, and finally, the general store. That's your sister's place. Sarah asked, eyeing the well-maintained storefront with its large display windows and painted sign. Thompson's General Merchandise, Samuel nodded, pulling the wagon to a stop. Would you like to visit now before we go to the Parkers? We have time. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her skirt nervously. Yes, I think that would be best. Samuel helped her and the children down from the wagon. I'll wait here, he offered, give you some privacy for your reunion. Sarah appreciated the gesture, though part of her wished he would come with her for moral support. She took the children's hands and approached the store, her heart pounding. A bell jangled as she pushed open the door. The interior was well stocked and orderly, with shelves of goods ranging from canned foods to bolts of fabric, from tools to household items. A portly man with side whiskers stood behind the counter, helping a customer. Sarah waited until the customer left, then stepped forward. Excuse me, I'm looking for Beatrice Thompson. The man looked up, surprise registering on his face as he took in Sarah and the children. Mrs. Thompson is my wife. May I ask who's calling? I'm her sister, Sarah Miller. These are my children, Emma and James. The man's eyebrows shot up. Sarah from St. Louis. Well, I'm Howard Thompson, Beatrice's husband. She's mentioned you often. He extended his hand, which Sarah shook. Beatrice is at home, just behind the store. Let me take you to her. Howard led them through a door at the back of the store and across a small yard to a modest house. It was neat and well maintained, with flower pots on the porch and curtains in the windows. Beatrice? Howard called as they entered. "You have visitors." A woman emerged from what appeared to be a kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a few years older than Sarah, with the same dark hair and blue eyes, though her face was fuller and her figure more matronly. Beatrice stared for a moment, then let out a cry of delight. "Sarah." "Oh my goodness, is it really you?" She rushed forward, enveloping Sarah in a tight hug that smelled of baking bread and lavender water. Sarah returned the embrace, tears springing to her eyes at the familiar comfort of her sister's arms. "Hello, Beatrice." Beatrice pulled back, holding Sarah at arm's length to examine her. "Let me look at you. Oh, you're too thin, but still as pretty as ever." Her gaze shifted to the children who were watching shyly. "And these must be Emma and James. My goodness, how they've grown since you sent that photograph last year." The next hour passed in a flurry of conversation, with Sarah explaining about Daniel's death, the financial hardships that followed, and their harrowing journey west. She told Beatrice about the stagecoach attack and how Samuel had found them wandering in the wilderness. "He offered me a position as housekeeper at his ranch," Sarah concluded, carefully watching her sister's reaction. "The children and I have been there for nearly a month now." Beatrice exchanged a glance with her husband. "A position as his housekeeper," Sarah nodded, sensing the unasked questions. "It's a respectable arrangement. Mrs. O'Leary, the former housekeeper, still lives there and has been showing me the ropes. The children are happy, and Mr. Wade is a good employer." "I'm sure he is," Beatrice said, her tone suggesting she wasn't entirely convinced. "But Sarah, when you wrote that you were coming west, we expected you to stay with us. That's why we added the room to the back of the house last year in anticipation of your arrival." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. It's just, the position at the ranch came at a time when we needed it most. The children have space to play, Emma is learning to ride, and—" She hesitated, then added softly, "It feels like home." Beatrice studied her face, then seemed to come to a realization. "This Mr. Wade, is he unmarried?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, but that has nothing to do with my decision to accept the position." "Doesn't it?" Beatrice asked gently. "Sister, I know that look. I wore it myself when I first met Howard." Sarah couldn't deny it, not to her sister who knew her too well. "Mr. Wade has been kind to us, but our relationship is strictly professional. He needed a housekeeper and I needed work." Howard cleared his throat. "Well, regardless of the arrangements, we're just glad you're safe and nearby. You know you and the children are always welcome here should circumstances change." "Thank you," Sarah said sincerely. "That means a great deal to me." Beatrice reached across the table to squeeze Sarah's hand. "Just promise me one thing. If this Mr. Wade's intentions toward you ever become more than professional, make sure he does right by you and the children. You deserve happiness, Sarah, after everything you've been through." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "I promise." When it was time to leave for the Parkers' dinner party, Beatrice hugged Sarah tightly. "Don't be a stranger," she whispered. "Come visit often and bring those beautiful children and your Mr. Wade too, if you like. I want to meet this man who's captured my sister's heart, whether she admits it or not." Sarah laughed, blinking back tears. "He's not my Mr. Wade, but I'll bring him next time. I'd like you to meet him." As they walked back to where Samuel waited with the wagon, Sarah felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. Her sister had not judged her choices or insisted she leave the ranch. Instead, Beatrice had offered understanding and support, along with a gentle nudge toward acknowledging her growing feelings for Samuel. Samuel stood as they approached, his expression questioning. "How did it go?" Sarah smiled, genuine and warm. "Wonderfully. My sister and her husband send their regards and have invited us all to dinner next week." Relief crossed Samuel's face. "I'm glad. Family is important." As he helped her back into the wagon, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary, and Sarah found herself wondering if perhaps Beatrice was right, if there might be more between them than a professional arrangement after all. The dinner at the Parkers' home was a pleasant affair, with good food and engaging conversation. Judge Parker was a natural storyteller, regaling them with tales of the early days of the territory, while Mrs. Parker took a motherly interest in Emma and James, introducing them to her grandchildren who were visiting from Santa Fe. Sarah observed Samuel throughout the evening, noting how at ease he seemed in this social setting, how respected he was by the judge and his wife. It was clear he was not just a successful rancher but a valued member of the community. As the evening drew to a close, Mrs. Parker drew Sarah aside. "My dear, I'm so pleased to meet you. Samuel has spoken highly of your capabilities." "Thank you," Sarah replied, surprised that Samuel had discussed her with his friends. "The Parkers are lucky to have you," Mrs. Parker continued. "It's been years since that house had a woman's touch, not since his mother passed, God rest her soul." His mother? Sarah asked, suddenly curious about Samuel's past, which he rarely discussed. Mrs. Parker nodded. "Yes, Eliza Wade was a remarkable woman. She and Samuel's father built that ranch from nothing. When they both died of fever 10 years ago, Samuel took over, barely more than a boy himself." She patted Sarah's hand. "It does my heart good to see life returning to that house. The children's laughter, your capable management, it's what Samuel needs whether he realizes it or not." Sarah didn't know how to respond to such a personal observation from a woman she had just met, but was saved from having to do so when Samuel approached to say it was time to leave. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the children having fallen asleep in the back of the wagon. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. "Did you enjoy the evening?" Samuel asked, his voice low so as not to wake the children. "Very much," Sarah replied. "The Parkers are lovely people." Samuel nodded. "They've been good friends to me over the years. The judge helped me sort out the legal matters after my parents died." Sarah hesitated, then said gently, "Mrs. Parker mentioned your parents. I'm sorry for your loss." Samuel was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not respond. Finally, he said, "It was a long time ago, but thank you." They rode in silence for a while longer, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. "And your sister?" Samuel asked eventually. "How did that reunion go?" Sarah smiled in the darkness. "Better than I expected. She was surprised to learn about my position at the ranch, but supportive. She and her husband have invited us all to dinner next week." "Us all?" Samuel questioned. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "You're included in the invitation if you'd like to come." Samuel seemed pleased by this. "I'd be honored." As they approached the ranch, the house dark except for the lantern Mrs. O'Leary had left burning on the porch, Sarah found herself reluctant for the evening to end. These quiet moments with Samuel, away from the daily routines of the ranch, were rare and precious. "Thank you for today," she said softly as he brought the wagon to a stop. "For taking us to town for the dinner, for everything." Samuel turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the moonlight. "You don't need to thank me, Sarah." The way he said her name, with a gentle reverence that made her heart flutter, emboldened her. "Mrs. Parker said something tonight that made me think." "Oh," Samuel raised an eyebrow, curious. "She said it was good to see life returning to your house." "That it was what you needed." Sarah took a deep breath. "Is that true, Samuel? Do you need us, me and the children, as more than just employees?" The question hung between them, fraught with possibility. Sarah held her breath, suddenly terrified that she had misread the situation, that she had overstepped. Samuel was still for a long moment, then slowly reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers calloused but gentle. "Yes," he said simply. "I need you, Sarah, all of you. More than I realized until you came into my life." Sarah leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "I've been trying to convince myself that our arrangement was purely professional, but it hasn't been, not for some time," Samuel finished for her. "Not for me, at least." "Nor for me," Sarah admitted. In the back of the wagon, one of the children stirred, breaking the moment. Samuel withdrew his hand reluctantly. "We should get them to bed." Sarah nodded, though she was loath to end this newfound openness between them. "Yes, of course." Samuel helped her down from the wagon, then gathered James in his arms while Sarah lifted a sleepy Emma. They carried the children into the house and up to their bedroom, working together in comfortable silence to tuck them into bed. Afterward, they stood in the hallway outside the children's room, the house quiet around them. "Sarah," Samuel began, his voice low, "I want you to know that my feelings for you and the children are genuine, but I also understand your need for independence, for security. I won't press you for more than you're ready to give." Sarah looked up at him, touched by his understanding. "Thank you. This is all happening so quickly. When Daniel died, I never thought I would feel this way again about anyone, Samuel nodded. Take the time you need, I'm not going anywhere. He bent and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, a gesture so tender it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Samuel, she whispered, watching as he turned and walked down the hall to his own room. Sarah stood there for a long moment after he'd gone, her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been, her heart full of a hope she had thought lost forever. The following weeks brought a subtle but significant shift in the dynamics at the Triple W Ranch. While Sarah continued her duties as housekeeper, there was a new awareness between her and Samuel, an unspoken acknowledgement of deeper feelings that colored their interactions. Samuel began joining the family for more meals, helping Emma with her riding lessons and teaching James how to care for the horses. The children flourished under his attention, especially Emma, who followed him around the ranch whenever she could, soaking up his knowledge about horses and ranch life. One evening in late September, after the children were in bed, Sarah found Samuel on the porch, as had become their habit. The nights were growing cooler as autumn approached, and she had wrapped herself in a shawl against the chill. The children were asking if they could help with the cattle drive next month, Sarah said, settling into the chair beside him. Emma is convinced she's ready to be a proper cowgirl. Samuel chuckled, the sound warming Sarah more than her shawl. She's got spirit, that one. Reminds me of someone else I know. Sarah smiled, accepting the compliment. She adores you, you know, both of them do. Samuel's expression grew serious. And their mother, how does she feel? The directness of the question took Sarah by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. In the weeks since their conversation after the Parkers' dinner, they had been dancing around the growing feelings between them, neither quite ready to put them into words. Their mother, Sarah said slowly, gathering her courage, finds herself thinking about you far more than is proper for an employee. Samuel's eyes darkened. I've never thought of you as just an employee, Sarah. Not since the moment I found you walking those dusty miles with your children. He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. Do you remember what I said to you that day? Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. You said I would walk beside you from now on. I meant it, Samuel said quietly, not behind me, not ahead of me, but beside me. As my equal, my partner. He paused, then added softly, my wife, if you'll have me. Sarah's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at twice its normal speed. Samuel, are you proposing? He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his face and made him look years younger. I suppose I am, though I had planned something a bit more romantic. He shifted in his chair to face her more directly, still holding her hand. Sarah Miller, I've grown to love you and your children more than I thought possible. I want to build a life with you, to raise Emma and James as my own, to perhaps add more children to our family someday. Will you marry me? Tears filled Sarah's eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Wade. Samuel stood, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. May I kiss you now, Sarah? I've been wanting to for a very long time. In answer, Sarah raised her face to his. Samuel's lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. Sarah melted into his embrace, all her doubts and fears dissolving in the warmth of his love. When they finally broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Sarah. You and the children have brought life back to this ranch and to me. And you've given us a home, a future, Sarah replied, her arms still around his neck. I love you too, Samuel, more than I can say. The sound of a small gasp made them both turn. Emma stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, a delighted smile spreading across her face. Mama, are you and Mr. Wade getting married? She asked excitedly. Sarah exchanged a glance with Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Wade has asked me to be his wife, and I've said yes. Emma let out a squeal of joy and ran to them, throwing her arms around both adults. Does that mean he'll be our papa now? Samuel knelt down to Emma's level, his expression serious. If you and James would like me to be, yes, I would be honored to be your papa. Emma flung her arms around his neck. I would like that very much. James will too, I know it. Samuel hugged her back, his eyes meeting Sarah's over the child's head, filled with such love that it took Sarah's breath away. "What are you doing out of bed, young lady?" Sarah asked. Though she couldn't bring herself to be stern, Emma looked up impishly. "I was thirsty." "But I'm glad I came down, or I might not have known about the wedding until tomorrow," Samuel laughed. "Well, now you know, but it's back to bed for you, or you'll be too tired for your riding lesson tomorrow. Will you both tuck me in?" Emma asked hopefully. Samuel looked to Sarah, who nodded with a smile. "Of course we will." As they walked upstairs together, Emma between them holding both their hands, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what she had been walking toward all those miles across the dusty terrain, not just physical safety, but emotional sanctuary. A place where she and her children could be loved and cherished. In the weeks that followed, the Triple W Ranch buzzed with preparations for the wedding. Sarah wrote to her sister with the news, and Beatrice responded with enthusiastic approval and offers to help with the arrangements. The ceremony was set for the first Saturday in October, giving them just enough time to prepare while still allowing the wedding to take place before the harsh winter weather set in. Samuel insisted on building an addition to the house, 2 more bedrooms, and a small sitting room where Sarah could teach the children their lessons during the winter months. "The house needs to grow as our family grows," he explained when Sarah protested that it wasn't necessary before the wedding. The day before the ceremony, wagons began arriving with guests: the Parkers, Sarah's sister and brother-in-law, neighbors from surrounding ranches, and the ranch hands' families. Mrs. O'Leary orchestrated an army of women preparing food for the celebration, while Frank and the other men set up tables and benches in the yard under the cottonwood trees. That evening, as Sarah stood in her bedroom looking out at the bustling preparations, Beatrice came to join her. "Are you nervous?" her sister asked, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah smiled, shaking her head. "Surprisingly, no, it feels right, Beatrice, like this was always meant to be." Beatrice hugged her. "I'm so happy for you, sister. Samuel is a good man. Anyone can see how much he loves you and the children." "I never thought I'd find love again," Sarah admitted. "After Daniel died, I was so focused on survival that the idea of remarrying seemed impossible." "Life has a way of surprising us," Beatrice said wisely. "Sometimes the path we think we're on takes an unexpected turn, leading us to exactly where we need to be." Sarah nodded, thinking of that hot, dusty day when Samuel had found them, how close she had come to collapse, how his words, "You'll walk beside me from now on," had given her the strength to continue. "You'll walk beside me," she murmured. "What's that?" Beatrice asked. Sarah smiled. "Just something Samuel said to me the day we met. He promised I wouldn't have to walk alone anymore." "And you never will again," Beatrice said, squeezing her hand. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October sky a deep, cloudless blue. Sarah stood in her bedroom, wearing a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Parker had helped her make, her hair arranged simply with a few flowers tucked into the dark waves. Emma, resplendent in a new blue dress that matched her eyes, couldn't contain her excitement. "You look like a princess, Mama." Sarah laughed, bending to kiss her daughter's cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart, and you look like a princess too." James, solemn in his new suit, nodded his agreement. "Pretty, Mama." There was a knock at the door, and Howard Thompson entered, looking distinguished in his Sunday best. "It's time, Sarah. Everyone's waiting." Since her father was long deceased, Sarah had asked her brother-in-law to give her away. Howard offered his arm with a smile. "You look beautiful. Samuel is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Sarah replied, taking his arm. They descended the stairs, Emma and James following behind, and stepped out onto the porch where Judge Parker waited to perform the ceremony. The yard was filled with guests, all standing as Sarah appeared, but Sarah had eyes only for Samuel. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on her with such love and pride that Sarah's heart swelled. As she walked toward him on Howard's arm, the years of struggle and hardship seemed to fall away, leaving only this moment, this promise of a new beginning. Judge Parker spoke the traditional words, but Sarah barely heard them, too lost in Samuel's gaze to focus on anything else. When it came time for their vows, Samuel took her hands in his. "Sarah," he said, his voice strong and clear, "from the moment I saw you walking those dusty miles with your children, I knew you were someone special, brave, determined, and fiercer than any cougar when it came to protecting your young." A ripple of laughter went through the audience. "I promise to walk beside you for the rest of our days, to love and cherish you and your children as my own, to build a life worthy of your courage and your trust." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she spoke her own vows. "Samuel, you found us when we were lost, not just on the trail but in life. You offered us not just shelter but a home, not just safety but love." Her voice trembled slightly. "I promise to walk beside you through whatever joys and sorrows life brings us, to be your partner in all things, to love you with all my heart for as long as I live." Judge Parker pronounced them husband and wife, and Samuel bent to kiss her, sealing their vows with a tenderness that made the assembled guests cheer. Emma and James crowded close, and Samuel knelt to include them in the embrace, making it clear that this was not just a union of two people but the formation of a family. The celebration that followed was joyous, with food and music, dancing and laughter lasting well into the evening. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel found Sarah watching the children playing with their new cousins under the cottonwood trees. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Sarah leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Samuel kissed her temple. "That day I found you on the trail, I was heading home from delivering cattle to Fort Bayard. I wasn't supposed to take that route, but something, instinct, providence, whatever you want to call it, made me change course." Sarah looked up at him, surprised. "You never told me that," Samuel smiled. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Sarah. That all the hardships you faced, all the years I spent building this ranch alone, were leading us to that moment on the trail." "You'll walk beside me from now on," Sarah quoted softly. "Always," Samuel promised, drawing her closer. "Always." As night fell and the guests began to depart, Samuel and Sarah stood on the porch of their home, arms around each other, watching as the ranch settled into evening quiet. The children, exhausted from the day's excitement, had been tucked into bed by Mrs. O'Leary, who had promised to keep an eye on them for the night. "I have something to show you," Samuel said, taking Sarah's hand. "A wedding gift." He led her around the side of the house to where the new addition stood, completed just days before. Opening the door, he ushered her inside and lit a lamp, revealing a cozy sitting room with bookshelves, a small desk, and comfortable chairs. "This is beautiful, Samuel," Sarah said, admiring the craftsmanship. "The children will love having lessons here." "There's more," Samuel said, leading her to a door at the far end of the room. He opened it to reveal a spacious bedroom with a large 4-poster bed, a dressing table, and a wardrobe. "Our room," he explained. "I thought you might like having a space that's just ours, separate from the main house." Sarah felt tears well up again. She had cried more today than in the past year combined. "It's perfect. I love it." Samuel set the lamp on the bedside table and turned to her, his eyes dark with emotion. "I love you, Sarah Wade." The sound of her new name on his lips sent a thrill through Sarah. "And I love you, Samuel Wade." He drew her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more passionate than those they had shared before. Sarah responded eagerly, all the love and desire she had been holding in check for months finally finding expression. Later, as they lay together in their new bed, the moonlight streaming through the window casting silver patterns on the walls, Sarah rested her head on Samuel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never expected to find this kind of happiness again," Sarah admitted. "After Daniel died, I thought that part of my life was over. I was focused only on survival, on keeping the children safe." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "And now," Sarah smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest, "now I'm thinking about life, not just survival, about building something lasting with you, about watching the children grow up here, about possibly having more children someday." Samuel's hand stilled. "More children? Is that something you want?" Sarah propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Yes, if you do. Emma and James would love a little brother or sister, I think." The smile that spread across Samuel's face was answer enough, but he pulled her down for a kiss that left no doubt about his enthusiasm for the idea. I would be honored to have children with you, Sarah, as many as you want, Sarah laughed, settling back against him. Let's start with one and see how it goes. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between two people who are truly at home with each other. Outside, a coyote called in the distance, and the wind rustled through the cottonwood trees, familiar sounds of the ranch that had become Sarah's home. You know, Samuel said after a while, when I built this ranch, I always imagined it filled with family someday. My parents dreamed of grandchildren running around, making noise, bringing life to the place. He paused, his voice growing softer. After they died, I threw myself into work, into making the Triple W successful, but at night in the quiet, the house felt empty. I never admitted it to anyone, but I was lonely. Sarah raised her head to look at him, touched by this confession. And now, Samuel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Now I have everything I ever wanted, a wife I adore, children to raise, a home that's finally filled with laughter. You've given me a gift beyond measure, Sarah. As you have given me, Sarah replied, leaning down to kiss him. Safety, security, love, everything I needed but was afraid to hope for. Outside, the moon continued its arc across the sky, casting its silver light on the Triple W ranch, on the house where children slept peacefully, on the barn where horses rested in their stalls, on the new room where a man and woman who had found each other against all odds now planned their future together. And in the years that followed, that future unfolded just as they had hoped. The next spring brought the birth of their first child together, a son they named William, after Judge Parker, who had married them. 2 years later, a daughter followed, named Eliza after Samuel's mother. Emma grew into a fine horsewoman, eventually taking over the management of the ranch's breeding program, her natural affinity for horses blossoming under Samuel's guidance. James, quieter and more scholarly, developed an interest in law and eventually went to study in Denver, returning to Willow Creek to practice alongside Judge Parker. The Triple W prospered, growing into one of the largest and most successful ranches in the territory. Samuel and Sarah worked side by side, true partners in every sense, their love deepening with each passing year. And sometimes, on warm evenings when the children were occupied elsewhere, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they loved, and remember that first meeting on a dusty trail when a desperate woman walking miles with her children found hope in the simple promise of a good man. You'll walk beside me from now on. It was a promise Samuel kept until his final day, many years later, when surrounded by children and grandchildren, he squeezed Sarah's hand one last time and whispered, I'll be waiting to walk beside you again, my love. And Sarah, her hair now silver but her blue eyes still bright, knew with absolute certainty that he would be that whatever came after this life, they would find each other again, as they had on that sun-baked trail so many years before. For some journeys are meant to be shared, some burdens carried together, and some loves, like theirs, are destined to last beyond all earthly miles.